So there's this saying in the tech space on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, where you can just go and do things. And have you ever been told that you need to do X before you do Y, or you need to get to a certain place in your life before you pursue your interests? Or maybe maybe you're at that point and there's just something that's nagging you in the back of your head saying that you need to pursue something that for some reason you haven't pursued. Well, I think that we're living in a really interesting period of time because of the ubiquity of artificial intelligence, and I want to make the argument that you can just go ahead and do things. So let me explain. Now, to state the obvious, I'm not advocating that, if you want to be a doctor, that you should go rock up to a hospital, put on a white jacket, and start prescribing medicines. I'm not recommending you do that. You should probably go to medical school. Or, if you want to be a lawyer, you probably shouldn't try to be like Mike Ross. You should probably go to law school or anything that requires you to have specific qualifications, X, in order to do Y. Yes, go ahead and do that. But for most things and most interests that people have, you don't necessarily need to have those things in place. And what I'm going to cover in this video is the reason why most people don't do things and how you can get past that and how you can just go ahead and get the ball rolling and the momentum started so you can just go out and just start trying things. And the reason why I'm making this video is because, like I said earlier, I think this is a really interesting point in the history of humanity that we now have the ubiquity of artificial intelligence. And as a result, people anywhere across the world can go ahead and build really interesting things, especially technology. And if we have more people that are just trying to go and build things, it doesn't necessarily have to be technology. It can be music. Like you can make a piece of music that's really really deep and resonates with a specific set of an audience, and really makes their life a lot better or a lot more manageable. I think that's great. I think that makes the world a little bit of a better place. Or if you're building technology, or you want to build a business and you help other people succeed in that process, you know, I think that's great. You're making the world a little bit of a better place. And if we have enough people who are building and trying to make the world just slightly better, I think we'll get to a place where the world will get a lot better. So let's dive straight in. So the biggest reason that essentially stops people from, just going ahead and doing things is, well, it's the big F word, and that is, well, fear. I have not mastered how to write with a cursor, so I'm just going to use text. Let me just draw a couple of stems here. And there's two sort of things that stem from fear. So the first thing that stems from fear is a fear of loss. And that could be, let's say, time or money. And the second is going to be shame or embarrassment. Right? Now, we'll start with this first one here. So the fear of loss. So let's talk about those two sorts of elements. So the first is time. The second is like financial just general well-being. So let's say you want to go ahead and pursue something. Let's say you want to go and become an artist, a musician, and you think about it and you say, oh wow, okay, what if I spend 1,000 hours doing this and I just realize I suck and I shouldn't have done this in the first place? The argument I'd make against that is probably just go watch an Alex Hormozy video about this, but if you just do anything enough for a long enough period of time, you'll probably get good at it. And you may not be world class at it. It might take you longer to get there, but you'll be a lot better than when you first started. That's for sure. So the issue is really volume in that situation when it comes to time. And you are going to, if you start with the assumption that you're going to suck, your first 100 hours are just going to be, you're just going to suck and you're not going to be any good at it. If you start off with that base assumption, what you will find is that over time, within those 100 hours, in most cases, you actually get really, really decent at it. You may not be exceptional, you may not be world class, but you become relatively decent. You become relatively knowledgeable about this, about whatever that thing is. And the second fear is, a loss of well-being, and that's generally finances. Like, what if I invest a ton of money and I don't get anything out of it? I've just lost all of that money. And the way you can sort of counter that fear is, I guess, the best advice that I've heard about this would be from both Sam Altman and Alex Becker, and I'll leave a link to both of these references below. Alex Becker's video on fear and Sam Altman's essay that he produced on his 30th birthday, called, I believe, the years are short, the years are long, the decades are short, which is basically a summation of all of the lessons he's learned in his 20s. And one of them was to keep your personal burn rate really low. So that might mean not buying expensive clothing or having a fancy car. It might not mean, traveling first class everywhere. Or it might mean, not buying takeout every single day, takeaways every single day, making your own food at home. Maybe it might mean living with your family, right? Things that you can do to lower your personal burn rate, so that way you can invest into, whatever the thing you're trying to go and pursue is. And if you keep your burn rate low, you'll give yourself more opportunities. So the second fear is the fear of shame or embarrassment, which also ties into loss, so loss of status, as it were. So across your life, you're going to have different sorts of relationships. You're going to have your family, you're going to have your friends, you're going to have people you work with, people you study with or studied with. And in each of these situations, you have your own sort of dominance hierarchy, your own sort of social dominance hierarchy. So let's just say this is one for your family, let's say this is one for your friends, this is one for, let's just say, people in your class, for example, if you're a student. So let's just break this down into these layers here. Let's just say there's like 3 layers in each one. Oh, okay. Well, in this case, we'll just give 4 layers here. Now, let's say with your family, you're pretty high up. Let's say with your friends, you're also maybe like about here. Maybe with your uni friends or whatever, you're maybe like here or something. You're also relatively high up. Now, whenever you have a place in the dominance hierarchy, your evolutionary biology wants you to move up as far as you can up to the top of the dominance hierarchy, if not the top of the dominance hierarchy. And the reason why your brain wants you to do this, and this is why people seek, to people please, this is why people will, they will do anything they can to try to increase their sort of social status, is because evolutionarily, our brains are basically hardwired to do one thing, and the core function is to keep you alive, and then the secondary function is, to reproduce, so that way you can pass your genes on. But for the primary reason, to keep you alive, in the past, especially if you watch my last video, I talked about tribalism very briefly, and when we existed in tribes, if you were higher up in the dominance hierarchy, your chances of survival went up. The lower you were in the dominance hierarchy, the more likely you were to probably be exiled from the tribe, and then your chance of survival plummeted. Now, the reason why you might be worried or afraid to go ahead and not do the popular thing and pursue the thing that you're interested in, because that's not a popular thing. Like, if you're with, let's say example, you're a uni student, and I'll give a story for this in a second. The popular thing to do when you're like in university, especially when you're like in your first year, is to go ahead and party. Go ahead, have fun, go live your life. You've got your freedom. Go ahead and enjoy yourself. And what that often means is partying, getting hammered, or whatever that means. And doing that will basically increase your social status. That'll help you grow on that dominance hierarchy that you have there. So therefore, the thing that's the exact opposite, which is to not party, to not go out or get hammered, and to stay inside and focus and develop the thing, or pursue the things that you're interested in, or pursue a specific skill set that you're interested in, is going to therefore lower your position in the dominance hierarchy, is going to fall. So a story from my life, I guess, that I'll share is when I was in my first year of university, and for what it's worth, I'm not recommending anybody do this, but I lived my first year very, very disciplined. So my routine pretty much day to day would be, and this was like 7 days a week, so I wasn't doing this just Monday through Friday, I was doing this just when I had classes, but I would do it literally every single day. I would wake up at between the hours of 4:30 to 4:45, get ready, start my day, eat my breakfast, and in the mornings, what I would do is I would either study, especially if I had like an exam, or complete any homework that was due in for that day, or maybe even review any assignments I had to submit, maybe like a couple days in advance. Or the other thing I would be doing would be learning to code. Those were the two things I would be doing. And if I didn't do that if I wasn't learning how to code first thing in the morning, I'd do it in the evening. And outside of that, the hobby I had was more so like making like YouTube content, like maybe not necessarily like this. If you scroll down to my channel, you could probably find some videos from like a few years back, and that's pretty much what I did. I went clubbing, I believe, once in the entirety of my first year. And for what it's worth, I do regret not going out more and being more social. Like, so I'm not advocating that anybody copy what I did. I did it because I really wanted to get good at learning how to code, but I also want to make sure that I did really, really well academically. And I did. I came top of my class pretty much every single year. I think, yeah, quite literally every single year. Came top of my class, graduated first, highest grade, got like an award or something from university. So, I did work hard for it, but I also really cared about making sure that I could develop skill sets outside of my academic setting, so that way I could do things. I could just go ahead and equip myself to go ahead and do things. What I would honestly recommend, if I could go back in time, I would say, honestly, going out a little bit more, meeting more people, trying to make more friends. I would say that's probably a good thing. I wouldn't recommend necessarily sacrificing everything to go ahead and do it, but I did, because this is a completely separate story. The reason I learned how to code was mainly so I could build a startup. So I don't recommend necessarily doing exactly what I did, but maybe you could take something from that anyway. Maybe taking the element of learning a skill set while you're in, an academic setting. But in any case, in these dominance hierarchies, so if you decide to not study, or so you decide to not go and party, you're going to go down a layer. And that can be concerning because, you want to have friends. You might think, oh gosh, I don't have any friends. I'm going to lose my friends, or whatever it is that whatever you're telling yourself about not having any friends. And the question I would ask you, well, actually, I'd implore you to ask yourself, well, there's two questions. The first question is, what is the duration of that hierarchy? So there's a saying that people come into your life for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. And in most cases, it's going to be the former two. Those former two reasons. People will come into your life for a season, so maybe let's, like, for example, friends like in university. It may be for a reason. That could be partners, for example. Maybe you learn something from those relationships, or for a lifetime. So that might be your spouse. That might be your best friend, for example. So ask yourself what the duration of your hierarchy actually is. So I'm going back to the university example, but let's say, example, if you are in university, it's like what, 3 or 4 years, right? Well, unless you decide to pursue like postgraduate studies. So the duration of your hierarchy is only 3 or 4 years. It's not that long in the span of your entire life. It might feel like a long time, but in the span of your entire life, it's relatively small. It's a small percentage. It's maybe like 5%. And the second question I'd implore you to ask yourself is this the hierarchy you want? So if you have like an idea of the kind of person that you want to be in a few years from now, ask yourself, what kind of hierarchy what kind of people would that person be around? And ask yourself if the current hierarchies you have are the hierarchies you want in 5 years. If they are, great. If they're not, then it might be worth considering, going back a little bit, taking a step back slightly, and taking that risk to pursue your interests. So those are the two core reasons why most people will generally not pursue the things that they're interested in. Is because of a fear of loss of some kind, and human beings, by our definition, human beings by nature are going to be risk averse. And the second reason is because we don't want to lose our status. And the argument I'm making is that it's okay to take a hit on your immediate status, because longer term, you'll thank yourself for it because you took a swing at something you cared about. So now let's dive into how you can actually get that process of starting to do things. Now, I'm going to assume you're at like ground zero, like you don't actually have a completely concrete idea. Now, realistically, there's a good chance that you probably already know what you kind of want to do, but I'm going to go ahead and start from ground zero in case there is anybody that maybe is at that point. And if you are at that point, that's fine. Like I'm just going to map out the entire sort of thought tree you can I'm going down. And if you've already got a concrete idea of what you want to pursue, then you're already ahead. So let's just start. So the first thing you want to do is you'll want to start with something more broad. So a broad interest. So for example, that could be, let's say example, that could be music. That could be tech, like software or hardware. That could be maybe gaming, or maybe it's like content, for example. I'll just give those 4 examples. Now, the second step, after you've kind of identified the rough, broad area of interest that you have, would be to go ahead and take a step down and identify what that specific interest is. So say, example, if you're interested in music, it's more so in terms of like a goal perspective, I guess, to put it in a goal perspective. So like maybe you have this desire to become a singer, for example, right? Or maybe you want to build hardware or software, for example. Let's just say that's like a rough area of your interest. That's kind of the thing you want to get good at. You want to get good at singing. You want to get good at making hardware. Or maybe you want to just go ahead and start building software and applications. The next step after that would be to actually identify what the skill sets you would need to actually get good at that thing. So let's just say the general skill set is going to be, let's say music. Let's just say music as an example here, and then I'll give a few other examples as well. So, for example, with music, maybe it's going to be, songwriting. Then let's just go ahead and make this a bullet point and make this a bit wider. So maybe that's songwriting. Maybe that's going to be production. Maybe that's going to be vocalizing. There's probably a bunch more things. I don't know. I'm not a singer. Yeah, so there's going to be a bunch of skills here. Or maybe, let's say, example, you want to go and build software. So maybe those skill sets are going to look like something like front-end development, back-end development, and then you can get even more specific as well. So for example, maybe like front-end development, you want to get really good at, let's say, Next.js, for example, and maybe TypeScript, right? Maybe back-end development, you want to get really good at Express, Node, and I don't know, maybe you want to get really great with MongoDB, for example. Maybe you want to pursue the MERN stack. Then maybe there's like a bunch of things. Essentially, you want to make a list of all of the things that you would need to get good at. And if you're not sure, you can probably just go and ask ChatGPT, or you can just look it up. Like you can just literally, if you go to ChatGPT saying, my ambition is to do X, like I want to go and build software, what would all of the skill sets I would need to know on how I can build software? And it will just like list out all those things. From there, after you've listed out what exactly you need to learn, so this is the skill set, this is the stack of things that you need to have. This is a stack of skills. The next step, because especially if you have a massive list of things you have to do, it can get really overwhelming and you probably won't start with any of them. So figure out which one's the easiest, and again, just use like ChatGPT, it's free online. So just go ahead and ask. Just say, which of these is the easiest to get started with? And then from that point on, just get started with one of them and execute. And this is the most important bit, to set yourself a small goal of some kind. So, for example, maybe that's going to be, publish a song. Or maybe that goal is going to be to, let's say in the case of building something, let's say publish an app, Just launch an app of some kind, maybe either a web app or a mobile app, whatever kind of thing, whatever your goal is. Just write something where you can actually sort of measure yourself against it. Almost, you don't have to add a timeline if you don't want to. Personally, I wouldn't recommend it, just because, especially if you're starting out, you probably don't know how hard a skill set is to learn. Like, for example, for me, if I set a timeline for me to learn coding, it would have just not worked. In fact, I did try at one point. I tried to learn coding at least 4 or 5 times, and I just like failed like miserably each time. The final time I managed to actually like get it through my head was with Colt Steele's web development like academy, like a few years back. I took it, and yeah, so it took me a long time. It took me like 3 months plus to complete his course and to actually really understand those like things that he talked about. Then I did another course immediately after that as well, that was more focused on being able to write more functional code. Colt Steele's course was really good for just understanding the fundamentals of programming. But then afterwards, his coworker Ian or something, he had like this other course for Node.js, which I thought was really interesting. So that helped a lot. And so maybe it took me about 7 or 8 months, right? So it took me a while. And then I think after learning all of that, maybe I published something for the first time properly maybe a few months after that. So it took me a while, and it might take you a while as well, and that's okay. You don't know how long it's going to take, so you don't have to set a timeline if you don't want to. You can if you work better under a timeline, and you're able to and you think you can hit it no matter what the circumstances, great, do it. But if you're starting out from scratch and you've got zero experience in anything that you're pursuing, then it's probably a good idea not to give yourself that timeline and just give yourself enough time to understand things, especially if you're learning, because with learning, you can't necessarily force yourself to learn something. Like you can force yourself to memorize something, but you can't force yourself to learn something. That's completely different, because you have to actually understand what you're learning, right? So that's why it took me a little bit longer. So after you've set yourself a goal, start with one aspect of this stack. So what we've done so far is we've identified the broad area of interest, we've narrowed it down to a specific interest, then we've narrowed down the stack of skills that are required to actually get good at that interest, and then we've identified a goal to actually track whether or not we're actually getting good at that interest and see our progress on that, because that's the easiest way for you to know, versus just having like a rough mental guess. Because if you actually publish like a song or like an app, for example, like you've built that. Like if you built that from scratch, you've done that. That's definitely a way to show that you've learned. The next step after that would be to set yourself a time every day if you can, or start with one of these skills first of all. Just pick one, the easiest one to start with, and just set a small time every day to just learn. So that could be maybe 30 minutes a day. So I'd spend on minimum about 30 minutes a day. The only times I didn't really spend any days were like when it was exam season and I was really just trying to focus on getting like my marks up. So I would say that in certain situations, yeah, okay, maybe you can't necessarily do every single day, but in most days, if you can set aside 30 minutes or more, that's great, right? In other days where I didn't have any like studying necessarily that I had to do, I would spend 2 to 4 hours in the evening and just learning how to code. And this is going to be the tough part, and that's going to be the next step is going to be the tough part, which is going to be to just keep going. Challenge yourself just a little bit more each day, just to get better and get closer to cracking that skill set. There are going to be days where you're going to suck. There are going to be days where you feel like you're not learning anything. There might be a short period of time for like a week or two where you feel like you're making no progress whatsoever, and then suddenly, bang, inflection point. You're actually at that precipice where you actually do make that inflection and you do grow and you do learn. So making sure that you're consistent and you just don't quit when it comes to trying to learn that skill stack and working your way down it every step of the way, that will get you closer to that goal. And then after you've achieved that goal, you've now actually after you've achieved this like this minor goal here, you'll have in theory also accomplished this. Because if you publish a song, for example, and let's say it's you singing, guess what? You become a singer. Technically, you could be a terrible singer. I'm not saying that you could be a good one, or maybe you publish an app and it just sucks. Like that's a very real reality, and it probably will suck. But you did actually accomplish it in theory. Now the next question is, how do you get better? And make your second iteration, your third iteration, your fifth iteration, your 20th iteration better. Like you can measure quality afterwards, but the hardest part is just getting to that point where you can measure quality. And the final step that I'd recommend, I don't say that you need to do this, but honestly, this is just like a optional thing, depending on your personal opinion on this. And that is to do something called building in public. So what that means is you basically will start your journey and you'll document it online somewhere. So that could be, let's say, LinkedIn, for example. Or let's say, example, you're starting a company and you decide to publish what that's like on LinkedIn every day. That could be great, especially if it's B2B. Could be a great place to go ahead and publish about that. Or maybe you're learning how to build something like an app or make a song, for example. You could publish about that on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, or any kind of social media in general. And the reason why I recommend doing that is because over time, you're going to build up an audience, even if it's a small audience. And as a result of building up that audience, that can actually help you out massively in the long run. Now, I didn't do this, and looking back, I probably would have. I probably would have done it on Twitter X, and I might have done it on LinkedIn maybe. Yeah, back then. No, actually no, I probably wouldn't have. I'd probably realistically have just done it on probably just Twitter X, and then maybe at that time I didn't have a TikTok account, but I probably might have just made one just for the sake of documenting it. And the reason why it's important, why having a following can help, is because let's say example your goal is to become a musician, and you're building in public and you're documenting your journey of learning, then what will happen is you'll build up a small audience already. So when you do release your first song, you've already got a small audience to start with. You're not going from ground zero again. Similarly, if let's say you're building a SaaS company and you start to build in public, you talk about your journey of building an application, learning how to code and building something, you could attract your first set of customers or users. You might even find, especially if it's on like Twitter, or X, you might even find your first investor. Who knows? Or you might find like engineers who might work with you. There is a massive benefit to having an audience that you build over time, especially if you're building it like that. Like for example, Simi Dillon, for example, this guy who runs a company called Simmer Foods, he basically does a lot of like documenting on like LinkedIn, and I think he does it a lot on Instagram as well, and that helped build up a massive following. Now in his case it's a B2C company, so it does make sense for him to document, so you don't have to do that, but it can be helpful. And that's it. If you basically do all of these things, you will be able to get that process rolling, at least getting that first step rolling into just doing things, because you can just go ahead and do things. Now,